Good morning, ladies and Good morning. It's 9 o'clock. We have a forum called the Griffin Board of Commissioners, April 25, 2023 workshop order. Glad to have everybody here in this beautiful facility. We're going to start off by presenting the annual audit results and annual comprehensive financial reports for the first year, for fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. County Director Amanda Carmichael will address Dave Earl, CPA of Malden Jenkins this year as well. So we're glad to have you.
Good morning. Just wanted to thank you. Just wanted to make sure that y'all were aware this is a little bit postponed from what we normally do. Normally this is a end of the year, calendar year type thing for our prior fiscal year, but because of some document situations, getting some information a little bit later than normal, we did have an extension that David filed for us, and so we are still timely as far as that is concerned. But it is time to get this audit over with because it's coming up on next year's audit. So I'll let Linda and David thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning. She said what I was going to say, but this is David Irwin from Malden Jenkins. He's our partner with external auditors, and he's here to present his results.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. Again, my name is David Irwin. I'm from Malden Jenkins. I was the partner who oversaw this year's audit of the city's financial statements, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be with you all here this morning to discuss results of this year's audit. I won't take up too much of your time, but the purpose of today's presentation is to provide you all an overview of our independent audit report, discuss the two compliance reports that we issue in conjunction with the audit, hit a few of the financial statement highlights, discuss some information that the auditing standards requires that we communicate to you all, and then obviously to answer any questions that you all may have. Now, the financial statements themselves, they are the responsibility of management and members of the city commission. As your independent external auditors, our responsibility is to issue opinion statements. We conduct our audits in accordance with governmental auditing standards and generally accepted auditing standards. And I'm happy to say that we are issuing a clean or unmodified opinion in this report. And this is what you want. This is the highest level of assurance we provide your external auditor. What this means is that in our opinion, the financial statements are considered fairly presented in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. As part of the audit, again, there are two compliance reports that we also issue, the first of which is the single audit report. Now, a single audit is a compliance audit that is required when an entity has over $750,000 on federal expenditures during the year. With all the federal monies that are being given municipalities this year or over the past several years, single audits are becoming more common. For example, I think last year you all had about between $7 and $9 million of federal expenditures. Well, in FY22, you all had $25 million of federal expenditures. So that required a single audit on two major programs, which was the Airport Improvement Program and the COVID Recovery Fund Program. And as was the case for the financial audit, we are issuing a clean or unmodified opinion on the single audit as well. The second compliance report is the Yellow Report, which is a report on the city's internal controls and your compliance with laws and regulations. And I am pleased to say that we do not have any audit findings reported on this year. We noted no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the city's internal control during our audit. And as I mentioned to you all before, for a city of your size, you all have significant financial activity that you all have to account for. In addition, with all the new accounting standards that are occurring each year, and really just how complex the financial reporting process has become, it makes it all the more impressive to stand here today and tell you all that we're issuing a clean opinion with no audit findings. So that's certainly something that you all should be proud of. I do want to thank Jessica, and the entire finance department for their hard work this year. Obviously, this was a unique year, a variety of things, the turnover in the finance department, delays, as Jessica mentioned, to get some of the reports that we need and get the audit finalized. And really just the unfortunate weather situation that you all had to experience. But your staff, they really did a great job. They were very accommodating our audit team and worked hard to get us everything we needed to get done to the audit finalized. So, yeah, thank you again. This audit to me is really a testament to the hard work by your staff, given the situation. So we thank them and certainly appreciate the opportunity for information. Excuse me. Now for a brief overview of your financial statements. Again, you all prepare what is called an annual comprehensive financial report, otherwise known as ACFR. An ACFR requires the inclusion of additional information that goes above and beyond the basic financial reporting requirements. Again, this document is submitted annually to the Government Finance Officer Association, otherwise known as the GFOA. Well, they put it through a pretty stringent review process. They have not only their professional staff, but also a special review committee reviews your document. And when they look at the city's CAFR, their goal is not to assess the financial health of the city, but only to make sure the necessary information is in your report, so the readers of your financial statements can do so themselves. And through this review, the city was once again awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for FY21, and that certificate is included in the FY22 report. And again, this is the 18th year in a row that you all have received this certificate. So again, just another example of you all going above and beyond the minimum reporting requirements. So this is an impressive document, and it is something that you all should be proud of. As you look through the report, one section I always like to highlight is the management's discussion analysis, otherwise known as the MD&A. This begins on page 6 of our financial statements, right after our audit opinion, and I would strongly encourage everyone to read the MD&A. The purpose of the MD&A is to make it easier for a broader audience to better understand your financial report. And it does this by providing a narrative explanation of the financial statements from management's perspective. So again, this section does a really good job. If you have any questions about any fluctuations that occur during the year, anything unique or unusual that happened, oftentimes the answer can be found in the MD&A. So again, this section does a really good job of summarizing the MD&A, summarizing the financial statements, and again, just providing the reader an analytical overview of the financial activity that occurred throughout the year. So again, I look into your document. I can certainly understand if you don't want to read all 170 pages of it cover to cover, but if you can, I would strongly encourage everyone to read it. All right, the city's basic financial statements are broken up into 3 components. The first of which is the government-wide statements. Again, the government-wide statements, they provide a broad view of the city's operations in a manner similar to what you see in the private sector business. All the city's funds in this section are combined under either governmental activities or business type activities, depending on the nature of the fund. And this section also has separate columns for your 3 distributed city component units. We have a slide here that summarizes the city's financial activity from the government-wide perspective. And as you can see here, city ended the year with assets and deferred outflows of resources around $391.6 million. Around $227 million of that are your capital assets, net of accumulated depreciation. Again, capital assets, that's the land, the buildings, the machinery, equipment, et cetera, that is owned by the city. You all also had around $48.6 million in cash and cash equivalents, and around $69.2 million in investments as of year end. If you look at your liabilities and looked at your liabilities and deferred inflows of resources, they were around $163.7 million. Of that amount, around $126 million are long-term in nature, meaning that amount is not due within the next current fiscal year. Revenues were around $134.7 million, which was an increase of about $9.5 million compared to FY21. However, expenses increased by $9.5 million as well, to around $112.4 million for the year. This resulted in an ending net position of around $227.9 million, which is an increase of around $22.3 million for the year. And again, that $22.3 million increase in that position, that's right in line with what you all had at FY21. So all in all, again, from a government-wide perspective, a pretty good year. You all were able to increase your overall net position by 11%. I will say this, the government-wide, this is really the only time we'll see the city's financial activity reported in this manner. In the day-to-day operations of the city, the focus is more so on the individual funds themselves, which brings me to the second component of your financial statements, which again are your fund level statements. As I said, this is what you all typically see throughout the year. The fund level statements, they focus on individual parts of the government and report the city's operations in more detail than that of the government-wide statements. And with all the funds that the city has, if I'm in your shoes, my primary focus is on the general fund. The general fund is the main operating fund of the city, and therefore it's where the majority of your revenues are received and funds expended. We have a couple of charts in these next few slides. The first one breaks down the general fund's revenues. Total revenues for the general fund were around $24.2 million, which was an increase of about $1.6 million compared to FY21. Two significant sources of revenue for you all are obviously taxes and charges for services. Look at this chart. Property taxes, they were around $5.2 million, and other taxes were around $8.4 million for the year, both of which are comparable to FY21. Now, when I say other taxes, that includes such things as local option sales tax, your insurance premium tax, and your excise taxes. Again, I mentioned earlier charging for services. That was just under $7 million for the year. All right, this next chart, it breaks out the general fund's expenditures by function. Total expenditures were approximately $30.8 million, and that's an increase of about $1.3 million compared to FY21. So again, your revenues increased by 1.6, but you also had a corresponding increase in your expenditures by about 1.3 million. Once again, no surprise, the majority of your expenditures are public safety, which was around $17.7 million. So public safety expenditures accounted for around 58% of the general fund's total expenditures, which is right in line with what we typically see of other local governments of your size. You all had general government expenditures of about $5.9 million and public works expenditures of $4.5 million for the year. As has been the case in prior years, the general fund has significant amount of transfers in from other funds, primarily from the electric and the water funds. So when you factor in those transfers, the general fund's fund balance increased by $825,000 for an ending balance of just under $15.8 million for the year. This next chart, it shows the fund balance history of the general fund over the past 5 years. It's always interesting to look at charts like this, just kind of see where you were and compared to where things currently stand. And as you can see here, your fund balance has continued to increase, especially over the past 4 years. 2018, 2019 were somewhat flat, but with everything that's gone on over the past 5 years and the economic uncertainty that has followed it, it's good to see that you all have continued to be able to increase your fund balance. So again, that's certainly something that you all should be proud of. And one thing I always like to remind people when I talk about fund balance, that's not what you all have in the form of cash for discretionary spending. Fund balance is merely the difference between assets and liabilities, only a portion of which is available cash. Additionally, another thing to keep in mind, the general fund incurs expenditures on average of approximately $2.6 million per month. So you all ended your fiscal year with a fund balance equal to approximately 6 months worth of operating expenditures. So with you all having a June 30 year end, it is imperative that you all have a strong fund balance as of June 30 to kind of get you through the months of July through November when your revenues are typically down. So just something else that you all should be proud of. A couple other funds I do want to briefly mention are your three enterprise funds, which are your water, wastewater, your electric, and your solid waste fund. Again, enterprise funds, they're used to account for operations in a manner similar to that of a private sector business. The goal of these funds are to be self-sufficient and to generate sufficient operating revenues to cover their operating expenses. And again, this chart shows the operating revenues and expenses for these three funds. You know, as you can see, the electric fund and water wastewater fund, they both continue to do quite well. They ended the year with operating income of $9.7 million and $8.7 million respectively. Solid waste fund, it did have a slight loss this year, around $321,000. I will say one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at your operating loss, including in that, is depreciation expense of around $751,000. Depreciation expense, that's a non-cash item. So while the solid waste fund did have an operating loss, it still generated positive operating cash flows. So again, that's certainly something that you want to see out of your enterprise funds. One final item discussed with you all, again, as I mentioned earlier, is just certain information that the auditing standards requires that we communicate. You know, with the city receiving clean opinion of audit findings, the information on this slide is essentially a formality, but again, we received full cooperation from management and staff. There were no disagreements with management on any accounting issues that would have affected the financial statements. There were no uncorrected misstatements. And again, we are independent of the city as required by government auditing standards. And with that, let's see if I have some questions. That concludes my presentation. But again, what I try to do is hit the highlights of what I think is the most important to you all. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. But again, just want to thank you, thank your finance department for all their hard work this year. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to be of service to you all, and look forward to working in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Owens. Are there any questions from board members? Staff have any comments or anything? Very good, Jeff. All right, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Great presentation. I'll see you next year.
Appreciate it. You too.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Anything else, Mr. Connor?
No, sir, I don't think so, unless you have any questions or comments of me.
So going to executive session for OCGA 4221 for the purpose of consulting meeting, legal counsel, pending potential litigation, settlement claims, administrative proceedings, or other judicial actions brought or to be brought by or against the agency or any officer or employee, or in which agency or any officer or employee may be directly involved. Do we have a motion on executive session? Mr. Tinsley, motion, second by Mr. Murray. All in favor, roll call, all